In the first South African study to explore the crisis communication needs of employees, specifically the University of Stellenbosch Business School MBA graduate Leana Kotze highlighted that in an organizational crisis, an employee-centered approach is good for employees and for organizations too. Kotze said that while managers were aware of the need for communication in times of crises, it was mostly viewed from the perspective of senders, such as senior executives, with little attention paid to what employees actually needed from their organizations. For more on this subject, we are now joined via Zoom by MBA graduate of Stellenbosch Business School, Leana Kotze. Leana, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to The Globe.
Thank you, Simpiwe. Good evening to you too. It's great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure having you this evening, Leana. First of all, what motivated you to look at this very, very important subject?
Well, Simpiwe, when we went into the first hard lockdown last year, though I was busy with my MBA, I kept hearing friends and family complain about how their employers were treating the situation and communicating with them. That's when I started reading up about the subject, and I found that international research on it said that generally communication is very external stakeholder oriented as opposed to internally.
I mean, in your research, who did you focus on?
I interviewed both employers in the sense of senior managers and executives from both small and very large listed organizations. And I also interviewed employees from the same variety of organizations.
And Leana, your research found that employees have a strong need for sense-making. Can you elaborate more on this?
Well, Simpiwe, basically during any crisis, be it personal or organizational, we all feel a deep desire to know what happened, how will it affect us personally, what we must do in the face of this crisis. And we want to talk to others about this to help us make sense of it. This whole process is called sense making. And by helping employees make better sense of the crisis, employers can help them be more engaged, more productive, have a positive attitude towards their organization, and be more committed to the work that they're doing.
Let's talk about the value of, an employee-centered approach for any organization or for any company. What does that, approach add in terms of the value add to the growth of the employee, to the boosting of employee morale, and as well as productivity?
Well, as I said, once employees feel cared for by their organization, when they feel that their organization is clearly and honestly communicating with them, they feel more secure in their position, which enables them to be more engaged with their work and therefore more productive. The fact that they have a positive attitude towards the organization also helps because employees are, in a way, representatives of an organization. They can speak to external stakeholders, be that their friends around a braai or on a public forum like we are talking now. So if employees have a positive attitude towards their organization, that shines through and ensures that the organization maintains a positive reputation externally as well as internally.
And what then do you recommend in your findings to close the gap in the workplace?
Basically, employers need to follow a few very clear and almost very obvious steps to make sure that they communicate properly with their employees during organizational crises. They must communicate clear, relevant, and useful information, that being from the employee's perspective. So that would, in the first instance, relate to job security and salary. Later, they should also show care and consideration to their employees. They can listen and ask employees, what are your needs? What do you want from us? And then the actions that they take need to be consistent with their messages and their listening and asking. Lastly, organizations need to display visible leadership, both from higher up, from CEO and exec level, down to direct line managers. And they can tell employees about the actions that they're taking to ensure that employees know that they are caring for them during difficult times.
And I suppose the overriding issue is, how the employees feel about an organization's response to the COVID-19 pandemic as a case in point. And the big question, Leana, is what should employers communicate to employees in times of a crisis?
Well, really, employees just firstly want to know that they have job security, that their salary will be safe, which, as we all know, was a really big problem during the COVID pandemic and the lockdown that followed. So that is primarily what employees need to know in the first instance, but really just employers need to communicate, be that directly or indirectly to employees, that they care about them. Employees understand that business needs to go on, but they don't want organizations to seem only focused on that. They need to feel valued as well.
Now, as a corporate leader, Leana, how does an employer, help address employees' concerns that at times appear to be overwhelming?
Of course, and that is very difficult for employers to do. They need to communicate clearly with their employees, whatever information they have. But at the same time, they can't over-communicate to employees because, as we all know, for example, from COVID, there's so much information going around, you feel completely overwhelmed and overloaded. So clear communication, crisp communication, and especially communication that comes from, for example, direct managers to employees, makes it easier for them to understand, to ask questions, and to feel comforted by what they're hearing from their organization.
And you have a great length, articulated that communication is central in solving whatever crisis that may engulf any organization. But then how do you identify the early signs of potential crisis? I mean, what can you do, as it were, in situations where employees are a threat to their own safety or to the safety of the others in the workplace?
That is, of course, a very challenging question, Simpiwe, and I'm going to dodge it to some extent by saying that that is not exactly what my study focused on. But what I can say about it is that if employers are honest and sincere in their communications with their employees, employees will listen. And they will do what's best for both themselves and the organization. Because when an employee feels that an organization cares for them, they in turn feel more committed to the organization as well and are more likely to act in its best interests.
Yeah, and in the midst of a crisis, the most important element or the greatest fear that may engulf the workforce, or rather the employee, is the issue of job security and how the company addresses concerns about job security. And understandably, Leana, people are more worried about their jobs. And keeping this in mind, leaders should sort of reassure team members that their employment is secure when this is indeed the case. And we've often seen so many, organizational leaders and companies not communicating effectively that their jobs are at stake. How do companies navigate around this? And how do they reassure employees that their jobs are indeed safe? And if not, how do they articulately tell the employees that their jobs are really on the line?
Something very interesting that came up from the study, Simpiwe, was especially from employees who are employed in the healthcare sector. For them, there was a lot of uncertainty, especially those not directly involved in treating COVID patients. And so there was a lot of uncertainty about what is happening with their jobs, what are they doing? And of course, for many other organizations affected to the extent that they may not have been able to pay salaries, but they were unsure when was certain COVID funding money coming in and things like that. It was very interesting to find that even in those circumstances, as long as employers clearly communicated to employees, listen, we know you want to know whether your job is safe and we want to tell you. But right now, we just don't have enough information to make a definite call on that. Even in those circumstances, employees were understanding. They understand that organizations might not have all the information they need to make a decision around, for example, paying full salaries or making some sort of cut. But they just need the organizations to communicate this with them. And then when organizations do communicate, be that when they find out or whether they have made the decision beforehand, once again, just being really clear about it and offering the communication on perhaps more than one platform, such as in writing so that employees can clearly refer back to it, but also providing a human face to make the communication.
Great point you made there, Leana, and I suppose just to add on it is the issue of urgency, because you know that communication remains central in every crisis, and it has to be communicated with a sense of urgency, and the employers or the organizational leaders need to apply that tone of urgency. But it often happens that that tone of urgency is misinterpreted and construed as draconic, and that the organization are simply imposing draconian laws onto employees. So how do employers navigate around that in ensuring that this is not indeed interpreted as being, draconic?
Very interesting, Simpiwe. In some organizations, leaders opted for a tactic of fear-mongering. Yes. Instead of activating their employees to get them to collaborate with one another and communicate themselves openly with their organization. Organizations instead, if you don't work hard, you're going to get fired and things like that.
Yes.
All of those employees felt very strongly that their organization treated them badly. And even if other aspects of the organization's handling and communication during the crisis were textbook perfect, the employees only stuck to that fear-mongering and how uncomfortable and unsure the organization made them feel.
And all in all, I guess, the company's caring and empathetic approach to restoring people's sense of dignity and, I would say, self-respect, perhaps, and inclusion will be the best way to address a spiraling problem from an employee perspective and employees who may feel lost and even isolated, isn't it?
Absolutely, Simpiwe. And the outcome of the study was surprising to me, given what I said to you motivated me initially to start the study. The fact that I've heard people complaining about it. And yet the study showed, contrary to international research, that at least during the COVID pandemic, which was the major crisis that most employees and execs had experienced, but also during other organizational crises, South African organizations at large actually do take a very employee-centric perspective to their communication. Though they might differ with employees on the level of transparency required in such communications, they do generally try to put their employees first, to treat them with respect, to communicate clearly with them about issues that are important to them, and to give them channels where they can give feedback and information to the organization itself.
Leana, great insights there. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Simpiwe.
All right, great stuff. That was Leana Kotze. She is an MBA graduate of the Stellenbosch Business School, joining us live via Zoom.